Hi, this is the monthly meeting of the Open Space Committee. This meeting is being recorded for viewing on Channel 9 and on the Dayton YouTube channel. So to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So on the agenda tonight, we just wanted to continue the conversation we had at our last meeting regarding recommendations regarding draft revisions to the town's conservation subdivision bylaws. Here at our last meeting, a lot was being thrown out there. There was just a lot of discussion. I know there was a certain representative here, I forget the name. Michelle, okay, she was taking copious notes. But I feel like we were a bit all over the place. We had a lot of good public input. We also had input from representatives from Dayton Trails and Parks and Park Department. Well, he was also in the planning board. But I just feel like at the end of the day, we just covered a lot of territory, and there was just a lot of free-flowing discussion. And I just wanted to come back and try to kind of consolidate about what our recommendations are. My understanding is that Serpent has requested to the planning board to be added to their agenda later this month, beginning of next month, to present the conservation, their recommendations to them, to see it, what they would like to adopt, what tweaks they want to make, what they would like to bring anything forward to the town. So this is just another opportunity for us to rehash what we did last time, make sense about it, because as I said, it was a little bit wild discussion, I think. And also get another opportunity just to think about what we would like to have included, if anything. Whether Circuit recommends it or one of us just recommends it, as public input during that meeting. But, so there were a couple things, topics in general, topics that we had talked about. One is the percentage of land, because right now, I actually don't have the bylaw in front of me. My recollection is 20%, which I think everybody recognized is, at least compared to other towns, very low. That not only is it very low compared to other towns, but it's very low compared to what developers have historically done in town, which is historically they set aside closer to 40%. The bylaw only says 20. There are other towns in Commonwealth that are higher ones, like 50, 70, even 90 in some towns. Yeah, I mean, wow. Yeah, one town I think has 90. But we definitely were gonna, recommend raising that, whether I think somewhere around 40, 50, but somewhere in that range, be a good recommendation. I know that the last meeting, Jonathan was able to join because of Zoom issues. You were here as for public input, but you weren't a member at the time. So I had wanted to, visit. Yeah, you're here as a visitor, so this is a chance to have you, both of you just weigh in on those things that you may have missed at the last meeting or not had the opportunity to comment on. So one is just that general topic of how much land we want to have set aside to qualify for a conservation subdivision. And raising it to at least double what it is now, if not a little bit higher than that.
What, in thinking about that, I guess my feeling is that when developers come in and present plans to us, start with that. Developers generally will tell us that they have 40, 50, 60% of the land set aside for non-use. And I'm wondering if we want to set up, if we want to go through the town, if we want to, for example, say 40% versus 20%, do we necessarily need to be able to point out location, 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 or are we looking at this as an overall?
I think it sounds like both, right? I think it's both.
Yeah, I mean, the bylaw right now just says 20% period. Doesn't describe the, well, I shouldn't say it doesn't describe the land. It may give some preferences in there, correct?
Shall be
Yeah, it has to be
open space.
contiguous open space. But, and it says that no more than, I think, 20% of that 20% can be wetlands. But other than that, it doesn't describe the land that's being set aside, it just says 20% of it should be set aside.
So do we want, I guess that's what I'm thinking about, and the reason I said developers, is a lot of times developers will come in and say, we've got a total of, hypothetically, 200 acres here. And,
That's good.
50% of it is set aside for open space, but out of that 50% of it, 100% of the total acreage or whatever, is wetlands. Or 60% is wetlands and 40% will be such and such. And I'm wondering if we want to use that kind of model, or do we need to use that kind of model potentially in a recommendation? So that if we're saying the town should consider 40%, do we need to look at where the land is in town, and do we need to parcel it off based on regions of the town? Well, potentially we could do 40% in this part of the town, but we could do 70% in this part of the town, and this part, if you look at what's here already, we may be limited to 25%.
I don't think we had gone down that path. I mean, that's something we can discuss. I think what we had gone down was to say, we know you can't build on conservation land anyway, the wetlands, say conservation land, but that's a protected area. So it shouldn't be a factor. That is off the table by definition. So let's only talk about what is on the table. And of what's on the table, say 40% must be set aside for open space. And in addition, we have preferences on that. One is things like, is it contiguous to other open space? Is it amenable to trails? And does it connect to those trails? Is it uplands? Does it, is there wildlife in the area that is not officially protected, it's not endangered, but we would like to have, that space because of that definition, because it's amenable to wildlife and we want to keep that core, for example. Whatever those requirements, but Kevin, when he was here, Kevin Smith at the last meeting said, it's a great place for a playground. It's a field there, for example. So yes, I think we do want to be able to have teeth where the town can designate what kind of land and specifically where that land lies in the parcel. Several other towns actually in their process for going through somebody coming before the planning board, the very first thing that has to be agreed on is where is the open space going to be? Before you talk about anything else, where's the open space going to be? And you have to get past that hurdle before you can talk about any other aspect of the project. That's step one, which I kind of like,
So Dayton technically has that in their bylaw, but I don't think it's always been enforced.
Right.
Like developers haven't always been held to it.
Yeah, but they come in and they present first saying, here's what we're gonna give you for open space.
Yeah, so they
Two,
have-
bottom line.
Yeah, so they say there's they call it a 4-step design process in the bylaw, which is the procedure, so it's a guideline for how the developer would select where the open space is. And it says that they should designate the open space first. The open space shall include, to the extent feasible, the most sensitive and noteworthy natural, scenic, and cultural resources on the property. But that's really all it says about how to select the space. So you could offer more like specificity there. And then after the open space is selected, then you would determine where the house sites are gonna go, and then you lay out the streets and the lot lines, and last draw out the lot lines. Another thing that we could do to like enforce that is do like a pre-application process where before the developer submits their application to the special permit, they would present this like preliminary plan showing this is where the open space is gonna be and this is where the houses are gonna be, and then the planning board would look at that and say,
except that if to some extent, and this is, we talk about the first step process though too, sometimes what will happen, and here's the question I would have, is there a difference in what has to be considered for a developer of, let's say, Forest Hills Estates versus a developer for Strawberry Fields, which is a 40B process? And the reason I'm saying that is because with the 40B process, the developers generally are coming before ZBA first. And when they come before ZBA, we're looking at a lot of other aspects of the development, but at that point, they're giving us their preliminary plan. This is where the streets are, this is where the roads are, this is where the sewer pipes are, this is where the cables, along with the 2 to 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, et cetera. And we're not necessarily looking at the zoning board, for example. We're not looking at the same things the planning board would have to look at. But they have to go to zoning first so that everything is done once before it can go to planning. And I'm wondering if, depending upon, going back to the same question, depending upon the type of developer and development, if that makes a difference, I think we have to consider. I don't know the answer to that.
Yes. Maintenance going on in the building, sorry for the penalty.
But I think that's something we need to think about.
Yeah, I mean, first is the town's bylaws or the town's bylaws. Whether somebody has additional protections or options because they're coming in as a 40B that the state is allowing now is kind of not relevant to what we're trying to pass here. It just gets layered on top of it. But in terms of, to your question, which is specifically how do we get them to come, if they're coming to zoning, Board of Appeals first, how do we get them to follow the same 4-step process, which is, let's talk open space before you talk other things. No, really, that's
No, I
basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
And in the planning board, it's kind of more straightforward, but it's not something on the zoning board of appeals, which is not very good. The process just evolves differently.
I don't know the answer to that totally. There are some aspects of certain types of like 40B developments where your hands are tied.
Right.
But some of the other aspects, when you're looking at wetlands and you're looking at open space, I would believe that they can still apply without.
Right, it's just whether they, step one is let's talk
But
open
the step
space.
1 process is different.
Yeah,
And is there a way, as we're considering this, and I know we're not just talking about development, we're talking about quote unquote open space and continuous use and linkage, but this is just one aspect of it. And how do we make the process flow in a way that's also more contiguous from different, considerations in town, from where it goes to and where it starts.
yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good point, I don't know the answer, like, whether that would, someone would craft the bylaw so that zoning board of appeals and planning are more in sync in how things flow, in this respect, or whether that's something that's just preferential by each board, or whether that's something that one doesn't have as much control over as the other.
The other thing that I think about for this open space, and when I was asking the question initially about where and how, is because I'm thinking of different parts of the town that right now have clusters of development, for example, and may not have as much open space to work with. And North Dayton, for example, in that old General Spring Street area, as an example. You've got a lot of neighborhoods where everything is clustered together. And when we look at 40%, for example, are we compensating for what's already there in the rest of the town, so that in essence, we're really looking at potentially 52% of all of our open space? How are we gonna account for that? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, like where you draw that line.
Yes.
For a parcel to be eligible for this type of development, it has to be able to accommodate at least 5 lots, like that's the minimum size. So how many, in that area you're talking about, how many parcels are there even that size that you could do this type of development?
Well, there's an ongoing court case right now, with somebody that wants to do a conservation subdivision in the North Dayton area. With a lot of homes, so it's well within that. But to your point, open space in North Dayton is a much scarcer commodity than open space in other sections of town.
Yeah.
So how do you, does it just like, it's the same rule for everybody regardless in town, or there's a higher premium on open space in one area than there is on another because of what's pre-existing?
I'm gonna apply the litmus test to it first. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just in theory, like, within a
Yeah, I mean, the planning board versus the town planning board
suggestion.
would have to have zoning areas.
Right.
Like, I mean, this zoning area is 75% open space and this zoning area is 40%. I mean, yeah.
And not only because I live in North Dayton, and I understand your point on, but when you're looking at the whole picture, well, when you should play the money. Are we looking at right now? And if we're saying that 20% of this, of Dayton should be open space, period. We may have already met that in theory, right? Just for conversation purposes.
Yeah.
So it would have to be almost zoned.
So as a subdivision bylaw, which is what Serpent is proposing to them, the proposal could include like, and down the road, because it's not, I don't think you get to find it in the bylaw. Planning board should consider zoning, additional zoning overlay areas, basically that govern how conservation subdivision bylaws can apply, and they may not all apply equally in every section of town in terms of things like the percentage and, you know, other things too. I mean, we talked about things like how useful is the space, just to be it's great that it's just raw nature, but we actually want it to be usable space. So in some towns, what is usable space and what they might need that for, where it's more heavily populated, you know, putting another playground in one area versus a playground in, say, like, the developer says, we're building a playground here, but you're in the middle of nowhere. And even Kevin said there are sections of towns that one way they want a playground, that is nobody lives there except a couple houses. So, you know, when we talk about what we would want to use the space for, and does it meet the designation of what the town could use it for? You know, is it just raw space? Is it open fields? Is it, we want to use it for X, Y, or Z? It all goes back into the same conversation, which is that different sections of town are gonna have different needs or wants around that, so. That opens up things, it makes things a lot more complicated for planning board, I think. I mean, it's not something they can't do down the road, it's not just one bylaw revision. It's a much bigger effort now for them, but doesn't mean it's not a good idea.
The other thing that I think about of it, I'm thinking of, I guess, a few things. I'm thinking of how some people will perceive different parts of the town with the socioeconomic part of it too. And some people may look at one part of the town as, oh, that's where the certain folks live versus other folks, which is wrong. But I think that because of the way Dayton was originally built way back when, there is some misconception there with that. And I think that that's a hard nut to crack as well, because that may, to some extent, dictate where people think there should be more open space versus less open space. If that make any sense. The other thing that I think about is if we're looking at different parcels of land for open space and linkage, how does that affect what could be a mixed use area for zoning purposes? so that you have open space, but you potentially also have residential space, but then you also have business space. Because one of the things that we all know in this town is that we need to have ways to bring in business into the town and industry into the town. And if our open space isn't done really carefully in terms of where we have it and how we link it, then we might be inhibiting potential other development, business development from coming into town. And that's it. I don't have the answer to that. I'm just throwing that out again.
But, I mean, obviously, a conservation subdivision is a residential subdivision, so it's all homes. So within, even if it's in a mixed-use area, they're building it as housing development. So the open space would be open space in the middle of or adjacent to, that, wherever that housing development is.
That would really be like subject to what the zoning is in that area, like I think it's been done, like some towns would allow mixed use with this type of development, but I think it depends on what the underlying zoning is.
Is this something that we need to consider though?
I would say it's something the planning board
Yeah,
needs
that's
to
what I was gonna
consider.
say, I think that's a planning board.
Yeah, the open space committee, I think it's out of our, out of our
Yeah,
realm,
I
but
think it's possible and we can consider it, but I think that's not really our purview here.
I mean, if our purview is to identify, strictly speaking, if the purpose of open space is to identify the open space,
I don't think that's our job, to be honest, like personally. I think our job is, at this point, is to help make recommendations to the bylaw so that it can be, the town has the tools to successfully implement it. Not down the road, let's consult the open space committee for open space, identification.
We're not setting town bylaws right now.
Yeah, I mean, anything that comes before the town down the road, you can be sure the planning board is gonna work with the developer. They're not gonna come here and consult us. No offense.
Yeah, we're not going to.
But-
I thought it was non-authoritative.
Yeah.
No, we're not an authoritative body, yeah.
But we can make recommendations in the bylaw to like put provisions in there that are gonna help to guide developers to choose like better open space.
Exactly, and at the end of the day, it's up to the planning board to, say like, no, that doesn't cut it,
Yeah, yeah,
here's,
and
I'd like this over here.
yeah, and a lot of it's gonna be like a case by case basis, honestly, like the planning board is gonna review a project with the developer and things are gonna apply differently in different situations, like it's not really like there's one cut and dry.
And that's one of the dangers of being overly prescriptive, is you're trying to anticipate everything in the future and you make it so tedious and onerous that it kind of,
And then it gets too hard to follow.
it's hard to follow, so you just,
So we can provide the guidelines to the planning board so that when they're reviewing the projects, they know what to look for.
correct.
So if we were to think about making recommendations to the planning board,
For this bylaw,
I'm sorry,
for this bylaw.
yeah, for this bylaw, where would we want to start with identifying what?
Well, I think that we
So-
start with
Okay.
what can be used, what type of land? For example, the recommendation is conservation or otherwise protected land is, you don't even count. It's not buildable, why are we discussing it? Let's talk about the sections that are buildable, and of that, what percentage needs to be set aside for open space? So that's one thing. The other is, what would we want to see in how contiguous, and we got the big discussion at the last meeting of defining contiguous because it gets tricky, but what we want to see in how that is put together, we don't want to see like this spider web of little paths that lead all over the place, but it's not really a big open space, it's, it's just, on the map, yes, it meets the whatever percent criteria, but in reality, it's unusable, because,
It's a sliver
It's
here,
a little
it's a sliver
sliver
here,
here.
when you do the math,
Right.
it's the minimum.
right,
If I can just hit this word minimum, I heard in town meetings, people speak to that with their passion, and I believe that the minimum literally means that it is the minimum, it's bottom line.
correct.
Right, and I wanna make sure that we know that some developers believe that achieving that minimum is like gold star worthy.
Yeah, that's up to the planning board,
And-
I mean, again, to like say like,
But I think we should keep that in when we make that number recommendation, keep that buffer, because you know there's gonna be exceptions down the road made where that number's gonna get shaved, because whatever, you know, we'll do this, they'll do that.
What percentage for a town land, or let me rephrase that, what percentage of the land in town is considered, is there any land in town all right now is considered state land or federal land or, you know, conservation land owned by the state or anything like that, or right now, that we have to rule out? Is it 5%, is it 8%?
I don't know. I don't think the goal is like X amount of open space in town, I think they are looking at lot by lot, or development by development, you know, how are we gonna treat this proposal? I don't think the goal is at the end of the day, when all the proposals have been done and implemented, that you reaches some magic number of open space. I don't think it could actually be even cracked, and that would achieve that, it would be, you know.
And I guess I think if we're going lot by lot, that's a potentially, you know, percentage basis. But if you're gonna do it with recommendations on how the land should be used, it's also, then to me, it's important to know what parcels of land in town and what pieces of land are state or federally owned by district commission, something like that.
But none of those would ever come up.
No, but if we're looking at land, if we're looking at potentially land where there can be, as you said, can be open field, open space, or used for playgrounds. We also, to me, want to look at land that somehow is going to be accessible.
Exactly, yeah.
So we still need to know who owns what in that respect. Not from, you know, private folks like ourselves, but the state, whoever, what land is owned there, so you know what the access is going to be like.
Oh, yeah, no, that's actually a part of what we discussed last time too, which is the land cannot be landlocked. It's gonna be usable. Yeah, and accessible can be within the development itself, or from an adjoining, maybe it's great for trails.
Yeah.
And the accessibility is through an adjoining property that has, that the town owns,
An
that
adjoining
has, the adjoining town that has trails leading into it, that's the accessibility. But yeah, then it has part of the requirements of this be accessible. You know, so developers that build, the street behind the properties, and behind all those properties, there's the space, that's completely landlocked, there's no use for definition. Unless, you know, the accessibility is for an adjacent property, that would be treated as open to the public, but accessibility is free and open to the public. You know? So I think that is not part of the bylaws today. No, it's not. It can be completely locked away, it could be for the private use of the government itself.
A question though, so you said like free and accessible to the public. Something to consider there would be the general public or the people who live in that development. Like if it's something that's only accessible from within the development and then you're making like how are you gonna offer access to the greater public?
Well, I think, and that was what was brought up last meeting,
Yeah.
and I think Kevin had said, you know, there's actually a development invite now that said, we'll give you up, you know, et cetera. I'm not ready to fill in the blank amount of land, but unfortunately that development seems to be like one road in, one road out. It's not user friendly to its neighbors.
And at the end of the day, the open space needs to be set aside under ownership, and the ownership has three options. It can be given to the town, it can be given to a third party, it's a nonprofit that's gonna watch out for it, or it could be owned by the HOA. And I think the point Kevin made the last time was, if he lived in an HOA and he was responsible for that HOA, paying to that HOA to maintain everything, including that open space, he's not gonna be thrilled about the idea of it being open to the general public. And doesn't, he was just like putting that out there, so at the end of the day, part of it is who wound up with ownership of it, in terms of who's benefiting from the open space. If it's the town, if it's a third party, Nature Conservancy has some property in town, let's say they wound up as a third party, whoever it might be. Those would be general public access. If the HOA itself is proposing to be the owner, so and again, at the end, that would actually go back to the planning board. They have to make that case by case determination about, who's it accessible to.
This is getting beyond where we want to go with my comment that I'm about to make, but it's just to take what Kevin said. Where I live is an HOA. I happen to be one of the trustees of the HOA. And I say that because I spearheaded having our roads become public ways a couple of years ago. I think you might remember when we had a meeting at one of the town meetings. And our roads became public ways. Now, having said that, as an HOA, we don't want the public coming in and using our small park area for picnics or anything like that. But at the same time, we need to allow it, and technically we have to allow it. And
Who owns the park area?
we do.
The HOA does.
We pay the property tax on it. It's open space, our property tax is minimal, but all of the roads around it are now, the whole loop around is a public road. The public can come in, the public can park there. Far be it from us to tell the public, you can't come on this is private property. Because the town is now responsible for our trash, the town is responsible for our roads and plowing, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets, I guess what I'm saying is, I know this gets away from the overall conversation we need to have, but when you look at HOAs, while I understand Kevin's point, there's a fine line there.
I don't think it gets away from it because one of our discussion topics last week is, and I've been on the planning board myself long enough to know if it's a true statement, but my feeling is that the developer comes in and tells us at the end of this is who will own the land. We want to give it to the town, we want to give it to a third party, or the HOA itself will keep it and maintain it. And I don't know that there's a lot of discussion about that. It's generally like, here we're telling you what our plan is. But I think just like the discussion, there should be a front discussion about what type of land it is, does it suit our, does it really meet our requirements? The town should have a voice in saying, who's gonna own it at the end of the day? And you know what, I think the town needs to
I
be
think
the owner.
conservation has touched on that topic.
The designation affects it, yeah.
Me inside,
Right.
visited, watched on,
Yeah.
they talked about the value of that land
Right.
to the town.
The town has to decide if they're gonna take on the
Well,
property.
They can't be forced to accept a donation, so if they decide to take it on. But I do feel like the planning board should have, if it's not already written in the bylaw, the planning board should have the authority to negotiate with the developer, like, who's the ultimate owner going to be? We have three
I
options.
would not have authority
I
to
know,
negotiate that.
But I just think that should be part of the deliberation process of that.
Do developers ever meet with the planning board to discuss their developments like before the application?
But I think the city's willing to do it, and they'll build back the hours if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I know that being as part of the general public meeting, we have it, closed doors, but
So you could add some of those conversations there,
exactly.
like talk about the open space, provide input on uses are gonna be, like, who's appropriate to take on the ownership, should it be legally accessible?
I just feel like it's not only should be part of the discussion, it should be, the vice law should say, the planning board has the authority to make a determination or, must be in agreement with who is gonna be the owner of that property of the custodian. Yeah.
And so they,
It just says what the options are.
Right, it just says the options. I just feel like maybe, and I might be wrong, because again, people that have gone through this before, that the developer generally defines what the choice is, so.
Yeah, and like the town could say if they have a preferred option, maybe there's
Exactly.
not a preferred option, maybe building it on property.
But, but the town may have a clear opinion about what they'd like to do.
like something we've talked about previous sessions, not related to this bylaw, but like, could we come up with like the open space committee could recommend a list of like, these are priority open space areas that we wanna see protected in town, and we can share that with the planning board, and then when development comes across that they're reviewing, if it's like one of those properties that we flagged as important, then maybe that's one of the things. Oh, we need to protect this, and we want to take ownership or.
Like the town right now is in the middle of talking the circuit about updating what is the list of protected areas in town, but it's 10 years old since they invested in that. And one of the things that I think they've talked about is it's important, whatever that recommendation is, that it included automatically be updated in the town's open space and recreation plan, so that the two are always in sync. And if there's ever a question, the planning board can just say like, here, this is our list of protected areas. You know, you're trying to build in the middle of it, and that, I don't know, disqualifies you, makes it more, uses the standard, whatever it is that the options are.
So just the open space, I mean, as the open space committee, can we weigh in on the development of those kind of
Of what is the protected areas?
yeah, like the priority.
I was invited to, it actually happened to one of them today, to do that, so, but it was just a meeting of town officials and. But I think out of that is kind of our recommendation to go with the select, so. That's what they did not take a hearing. These are the areas that, for various reasons. And part of the discussion is things that are already protected, and considering that traditionally protected doesn't add anything. So it's already conservation land, there to already protected, you know, that sort of thing. So, but what in and above that are areas of significant concern, or those are aquifers or environmental concerns.
I would like to see something in here that in that selection of open space, like selecting the open space first and saying something that if there's one of those like priority protection areas, according to like whatever the most recent version of that plan is, like that should be prioritized.
No, I would agree with that.
Excuse me, issue.
Do you want me to get you a glass of water?
They have policy about that.
There's cups from them, there's like a
Or
cooler.
color,
So the other one was, the Comcast one, Harley Field. And I was just kind of looking at one of this, he seems straightforward, this is borders, but I would say you have like little spider webs of messes that are contiguous
You're done?
with the border. So I don't know if I have any particular suggestions about defining the word contiguous in the sense that we want to, in terms of what you want to have as product, but.
You know, that's a good point. I mean, maybe we should.
No, I think the town needs to have one, just, I don't know if people have thought about how, what that definition would be. Ordering or touching is not the word, it's not contiguous. Technically maybe, but not in the sense that we want it to be.
Do we have a sampling of what other towns define continuous as? I'm just curious. You know, I mean, that's something we could do homework on. But
Yeah, I'd have to look if any of the bylaws that we looked at have a definition of contiguous. I don't know if I've seen that.
And this was also part of that, which is, I forget who raised it at the last meeting, I think it might have been Jeff Cabal, was, let's say you have, we're saying, recommendation is that you not include like wetlands as part of your open space, because it's not buildable, it's off the table. But you have a parcel here, you have a big pond, wetlands, you have a parcel here. Does the pond make it all contiguous? You know, it's all open space, it's open space that you set aside, it's wetlands you can't build on, it's open space that you set aside. Or does it say, this open space and that open space have to touch? You know? And I think if you include wetlands in there as part of a connector, then it's much easier to be contiguous because Dayton has so much wetlands and it's kind of a spider web often, so, you know, you might very well wind up with, you know, kind of scattering of good land mixed in with a whole bunch of wetlands. Versus just saying contiguous means this usable dry piece of land must touch this usable dry piece of land and equal, you know, the lot that we're looking for, so.
I think in the terms of looking at how the land might be used, for example, for trails, just using that as an example, it's really gonna be important to do that, to define that. Because if the land doesn't have to touch, theoretically, you could have 4 or 5 pieces of open space land that are completely surrounded by wetland.
Exactly, yeah.
And what do you do? And they could be reasonably sized pieces. And then what do you do if the town or a developer wants to come in and make a trail or an access point somehow to link a large piece of land, knowing that there's a potential wetland that they have to link through? And then are they gonna allow variance? Well, depends on the wetland and what, you know, what, everything that goes with all the wetland regulations. Is it a turtle sanctuary? Is it this? Is it that? So I think what we were saying a minute ago is how are we gonna define a recommended definition? I think that's maybe the place to start, one of the places to start.
It would be nice to have samples from other towns to try to tackle this and come up with a good definition.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll take a look.
Only in the interest of time, because we do try to keep this meeting to 1 hour, and we do have a couple people on Zoom. I just wanted to, unless people have other things they want to discuss right now, open it up for public input.
Now, let's do it.
Okay, if anybody on Dave or Woody, if you're interested in public input.
Hey, Robert Woods here. How you doing?
Good, thanks.
I just like to zoom in and keep an eye on you guys and see what's going on. That's all I'm doing here.
Okay,
And I'm hoping Jonathan's not coughing on everybody too much. I hope you're feeling better, Jonathan. You know, and I will say this, you know, I know that we can't stop progress, but we can control it. And as far as conservation subdivisions go, I'll just give you my take on them. More often than not, the developer will come in and let's say that they're gonna put 20 acres aside for open space. You know, they like to donate that to the town. That way there, they don't have to pay taxes on it. You know, and I don't like to see that happen. And you are talking an awful lot about, you know, opening up these opportunities for developers. And, you know, when this study was actually, when the town asked Serpent to help us with this, you know, we had some progressive people on the Board of Selectmen at the time. And the residents in this town would like to keep the rural character as much as possible. I do understand that, you know, we can't stop everything coming our way, but we need to control it as much as possible. And, you know, I'll refrain from saying that. The Open Space Committee really, as much open space that you guys can find and preserve is what interests me. You know, as far as building subdivisions or conservation subdivisions or building any more type of housing in town is just taxing our system too much. So I'm just gonna leave you with that, but thank you all for serving. I appreciate you, whether or not I agree or not. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Woody.
Did you have any comments, Dave, or? No, okay. So, as usual, I didn't do the minutes. So, we haven't been a meeting, a committee all that long, so we're not that far behind the minutes, but we'll get them to you. We can make sure to include that next time. Did anybody have any other comments they wanted to make, or?
I don't have any comments, but I do think before our next meeting, I would like us to be able to maybe send each other a couple of suggestions for recommendations so that we have something to start with.
Well, to be honest, before our next meeting, certainly they've already gone before the planning board. I don't know what date they had. I know they had talked to Carrie.
February 27th.
Yeah, they had talked to Carrie yesterday already and gotten a date. I thought it was in February, so planning board may see the recommendation with their draft. All I would say is, I would like to see as much of our input included in the recommendation, but we also have the option of joining that planning board meeting and giving
We do.
our own input and, public input, but just to speak to it, to say, these are some additional protections we wanted to see in there, whether they got included in a certain draft or not,
And we could also ask them to take it under advisement
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
for a couple of meetings to give us a chance to get some input into it.
I very much so. I mean, the planning board's gonna listen, mull it over, tweak it, make a decision whether they wanna move it forward at all to town meeting. And between now, I mean, they may, it's February, April would be the cutoff for anything to go to the the June town meeting, so the planning board could in theory bring it forward if they, only talk about it one or two times. But more than likely, this is gonna not give them enough window, and they'll wind up going to next November or, whatever before, if anything, they choose to move it forward, so. So I think we still have plenty of time to, continue to give our input on
Right.
it. Not to mention, I probably wanna open it up a couple times for the public, so.
Okay.
The only thing I would wanna leave at this meeting is, I know we talked about definitions. I'd be interested, and we talked about other jurisdictions and what their definitions were. I'd also be interested in seeing what other committees within our town, like conservation and Concom, use as definitions too, so that we can be parallel with them.
Sure.
And just keep that in mind.
That's good, that's a good point.
And then also just looking at our overall plan, the 10-year plan summary, the very first bullet point does say that we're to develop an accessible, connected open space and trail network. So I like that word connected a lot, so.
Yeah, definitely. So sticking with our first Wednesday of the month at 5:30, the next meeting would actually be, check the date.
Six.
Of the 6th, okay, March 6th.
Yep.
So Senator, want to make a motion at our next meeting, be Wednesday, March 6th, 5:30?
I will be out of town, but I will have full access to Zoom.
So, okay, all right.
I won't have to worry about that this time.
Same.
Okay, so is that on a motion and a second? I take that, okay, all right. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Right. So I have 6:20, somebody that could make a motion to adjourn,
A motion.
Second?
all in favor? Aye. Right, motion to adjourn, thank you.
Good night.
Right. Takes a minute, yeah.
There's a lot to consider, so much.